Welcome, everyone, to Security Weekly Virtual Hacker Summer Camp Interview Series. I'm Paul Asadorian, and I'm here with no stranger to the show and our good friend Corey Thuen, the co-founder of Gravwell. Corey, welcome.
Hey, thanks for, I'm glad to be here representing B-Sides, Idaho Falls.
There you go.
In lament of not being able to hang out in the hallways and do the beverage talks and everything like that, but we're doing it virtual.
That's it. We're virtually drinking all the booze and logging all the things, right?
Exactly.
And Corey, today we wanted to dive into, you and I had a very kind of brief discussion and like light bulbs started going off. And I'm like, yeah, there's a really big difference between a more senior person doing a threat hunt analysis and kind of study versus what's going into your SIEM and what might be operationalized across your other kind of functional IT teams. So, Corey, from your perspective, working on this product with a lot of customers and having a background specifically in, event analysis, what's the difference in those kind of subtle and not so subtle differences between that threat hunt and your operationalization of the SIEM?
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit, because that's honestly, that was since starting Gravwell, years ago, that was one of the interesting things just for me personally. I've been in the security industry for a long time, did vulnerability research mostly on the offensive side of the house. And so when I switched over to the blue team, it was kind of interesting to see the different organizations, the resources that they've got, how they approach blue team stuff. And I had a couple assumptions that got blown up pretty early in terms of, because I was, sort of naively operating in that, you've got these security experts who are going to be at every organization and they're going to have lots of time to spend looking at logs and finding bad guys and things, right? Which of course isn't the reality, because there are so many things that have to constantly get done all the time. And not every organization has the luxury of having a large security team as well. And so we've got these tools out there, and it's been interesting to watch the industry mature as we've gone from Snort dumping to Logfile or something to now we've got SIEMs, we've got all these crazy AI tools and stuff to help us out. I thought it'd be a good idea to kind of share some of that knowledge, dive into what the difference between the platforms are, why a company is going to use one versus another, how they can help you in your organization.
Yeah, and I think,
whatever.
Back in the day too, when I think about it, it was, 20 years ago was before many organizations had SIEM. You can get a SIEM platform now for really virtually any size enterprise, right? But back in the day, it was, you were threat hunting and you kind of were the SIEM, like all in one thing, right? Because you hadn't, like when I worked for university, we had embarked on the project to say, well, we're going to have this one central place for everyone's logs. That was a huge project, and that technology was still new 20 years ago. So largely, we would do threat hunting, find as much as we could from anyone who would send us logs, and then file tickets, basically, right?
Yeah.
And it's good to see that we've made this progression, and there are still two camps, and we can't lose sight of that. Like, everything shouldn't be just the threat hunting, and everything shouldn't just be the SIEM and operationalizing that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good point, that it's easy to maybe lose sight of or get sucked into some of the marketing around that stuff, right? Like, not fault to them, because everybody's trying to sell their software and their whiz-bang tools, but there's a lot of tools out there that are like, and this is sort of in the SIEM side of things, where you put in, your data, like a bunch of decisions are made ahead of time for you. You put it in, and then it's gonna do some crunching and give you your alerts, give you your ability to create tickets automatically, or it's kind of this pre-built, nice packaged way of just put your stuff in here and then we'll solve your security for you, especially when you start adding AI and threat feeds and some of the things that these tools are purporting to do. It can be easy to lose sight of sort of some of the fundamental blocking and tackling that still is vitally important to an organization. And nowadays we call that threat hunting aspect, that can kind of take sort of three forms, because SIEMs are great and they're really helpful for getting you up and running quickly, but they're kind of a set of rails. And once you're set on that rails, like deviating from the rails can be very difficult. If you're trying to analyze some data that you didn't know that you needed, or that got normalized in a certain way, and so now you lost the underlying record that created that, it can be tough to sort of root cause and fully investigate a potential threat or
and I think it's important, Corey, too, to mention that if you have a SIEM and you've got the SOAR and you're automatically generating tickets, that's important. We need that today because we have so many systems and everything is fluid and dynamic. And there are things we can say, hey, when you find this, generate a ticket, make this blocking rule, and I think that works. And when we say automation, we're not saying we're automating everything. There's humans involved, and we know that when we find certain events, we can automate the actions around them that can basically take stuff off of our plate so that we have more time for threat hunting, right?
Absolutely, and that's the goal. Because with threat hunting, it's very important that humans. There's still no better security tool than the human brain, even though we've got AI, we've got all this scalable stuff. It's humans that are so good at recognizing patterns and seeing the anomalies and knowing their own environment and having context. You can keep that all in your head, but AI and context generally don't go well together, and there's reasons for that. So there's kind of three sort of strategies or ways to go and do threat hunting. You've got kind of like you said, if you've got a SIEM, like you're going to be detecting threats, initiating some of these tickets or whatever. That's kind of the indicator or the tip based threat hunting activities to where you've got something that is a bad, and so you're going to investigate and go about doing that. And then AI assisted, I want to put the bold underline under assisted in terms of what you might want to do. So if you've got some fancy AI built into like some user behavior analytics or something, that can indicate or act as sort of another kind of indicator that can lead you down a threat hunting path or start off some of that investigation. But sort of traditionally, threat hunting, when it originates from a person, is hypothesis driven, to where you're going to kind of create that hypothesis that says, I suspect that, or I hypothesize that our SSH is receiving abnormal amount of attacks or something. And so I hypothesize that somebody has tried to brute force or come in that way. And so then I'm going to begin a hunt where I am going to sort through and try and look at those logs and et cetera. And those are kind of the three ways of going after threat hunting. And they really do require a little bit of a different tool, because if you try and do all that stuff in a SIEM and just stay in there, you're kind of stuck on those rails. And that's where things like data lakes, additional tools where you have the data and you have the flexibility to go in through and query that data, whether it's something like GraphQL or Splunk or something that's kind of outside the direct, more SIEM style of things. That gives you that freedom to do that. Or if you're putting it in like a Hadoop cluster or doing your own sort of data science, which is certainly a buzzword, but an emerging area to where people realize, we've got all this data, we can use really interesting techniques. But then that's a little bit more difficult because you're using, like Jupyter notebooks or something to try and prove out some of these hypotheses, which is often not fast enough or not easy enough. So there's different sort of stages of how you can begin doing security and threat hunting and active analysis of your data. I think that's the key difference as well between threat hunting versus indicators and purely just going the SIEM route. Is you're going to be doing a lot more active activity within your data, which helps take advantage of that context that you've got. So that's why it's important.
Yeah, and I really, now that you say that, Corey, I like, well, of course, you're sponsor of the show and all, but I love the GraphQL tool and platform as that place where I can consolidate all that data, right? As the analyst, I may say, I want some packet captures, I want some logs, I want some sysmon, I want some of this and mix and matching it. And if I can get it all on one platform, then I can do the analysis in one place rather than having 3 or 4 or 6 different tools that I have to go manually kind of pull that data together, right? That's really
absolutely
a big
our
problem
value prop. And the single pane of glass, which has turned into a non-term. But the goal with that was being able to put everything in one spot so you can hunt it all and correlate it all at once. But that becomes very difficult when you have to make pre-decisions about the data. Does that make sense? So that's where like a data lake is an advantage versus something more strict like a traditional database or something like Elastic or even a data warehouse, in terms of it's all about that scalable, how much pre-decision do we have about the data before we stick it in?
Right.
And that's really the limiting factor between what makes single pane of glass not work, is because a lot of people were using tools that required a lot of upfront decision about your data. And when you're talking single pane of glass, you can't. That's why a data lake where you just dump the data in, that has advantages there. But just from a technical perspective, some of the disadvantages then are, like if you're just dumping data into a lake, right, and you want to run a query that says, I'd like to count the 500 errors for Apache, right? I've got a bunch of Apache logs. I just want to count how many 500 errors there are. If you've got a data lake, you kind of have to dredge the lake to look for all Apache records that have a 500 error. Versus if you're using something like Elastic or something that has a bunch of pre-decisions about the data, then that number's just kept.
Yeah. Yeah,
right? And there are tricks that you can do, and that's one of the things that we've done at GravWell with our data lake. Since we custom built it, we can create a hybrid approach that sort of gets the best of both worlds. But those are kind of the fundamental trade-offs between data lakes versus data warehouse traditional, or going back to traditional databases when it comes to some of that stuff. The more pre-decisions you've got lets you answer different questions easier, if that makes sense.
It sounds like
one analogy.
It sounds like you're giving the analyst the ability to have some control over the normalization, right? Whereas in all their larger systems, right, it's predetermined. That's how they're normalizing Apache logs. In GravWell, I can say how I want to normalize those logs and correlate.
Exactly, which makes a big difference. The super high level analogy that I use sometimes is it's like having a sized wrench versus an adjustable wrench.
Yeah.
Right. The adjustable wrench is just, you can do, any size bolt, doesn't matter. Even if the bolt changes while you're turning it, you can adjust the wrench and go. But you're going to get more torque out of a size wrench because it's specifically made for that exact problem. Right.
And that's what you're doing in threat hunting, is looking for very specific conditions. And you need that level of control to uncover those conditions inside of your network.
You need to be able to open and close that wrench. You need to be able to adjust one bolt over here and then immediately switch to another one when you're threat hunting, because you don't necessarily know what you're looking for, so you can't make assumptions ahead of time because you're investigating stuff, and so that's an important part. So anybody who's doing threat hunting, there's sort of three key things that you need as well, and maybe that's kind of where we'll close off. Is you need shitloads of data. That's sort of number one. If you don't collect your logs and you don't have them somewhere you can analyze it, then you're going to have a bad time if you try and do threat hunting. So that's sort of step number one, which is great for IR and stuff as well. You need some smart people. The people, like we've said, are tremendously important to this. You need people who know your environment, who are capable and familiar with some of those logs. Usually, threat hunters are more senior analysts, people who've seen a lot of different security incidents and stuff. And then threat intelligence is also kind of an important part to threat hunting, right? You want to know who the bad guys are, what other people are seeing. That part is important. I know you've mentioned it as, the fourth pillar of the SOC. That's the thing that you like to say. And that's kind of really ties in when you're hitting the threat hunting side of things. So, get a little bit more enrichment in terms of what it is that you're looking for.
Agreed. Yeah, and that's the correct usage of threat intelligence, right? Is to give you that enrichment to maybe send you off on a path to do a threat hunt, right?
Yeah, it can't do your job for you.
Yeah.
Don't rely on threat intelligence to do your job for you. That's
great advice. Idea. Awesome. Well, Corey, thank you so much for appearing on Security Weekly.
Yep, absolutely. Hope everybody has a good week in non-Vegas.
That's right. Folks can learn more at securityweekly.com/GravWell. Check out the latest version. Get the community edition and/or a free trial. securityweekly.com/GravWell. Stay tuned. More interviews coming up next.